Oh, all right, let's go to Second Samuel 8. And if you do have questions as we're going along, either just hit the space bar to unmute, or you can raise your hand and I think you have to unmute. I don't think I can do it, but just for the recording, I usually try to keep the mute on to make a good recording for those who get this afterwards. We do have some people, Robert and Georgina, who can't always make it on because of internet issues out in Malawi. They like to get it. And I have some other folks we send it on to as well. So all right, Second Samuel 8. So in Second Samuel 7, David just has this really wonderful prayer that he gets. In fact, in verse 18 of chapter 7, it says, Then went King David in and sat before the Lord. And then he begins this great prayer. And, it reminds me of the prayer that his son Solomon has when God calls Solomon and says, Ask me what you will. What do you want from me? And it's like, and Solomon doesn't ask for riches, and Solomon doesn't ask for fame, and Solomon doesn't ask for power. He asks for wisdom so that he could rule God's people, Israel. And it so touched God that he said, Not only will I give you the wisdom you asked for, I'm going to give you the things you didn't ask for. I'm going to give you fame and riches. And if you walk in my ways, I'll give you a long life. Well, David has a similar kind of prayer, very humble, very thankful for what God has done. And David's been through a lot. Remember, David was anointed, when he was still fairly young. Samuel anointed him to be king. He doesn't become king until after, many, many years. He serves Saul in the army. He kills Goliath first when he's fairly young. He's still very young. Serves Saul in the army. Eventually, Saul becomes his enemy. Again, it never says David was Saul's enemy. David and Jonathan, Saul's son, become good friends. Saul chases him. He eventually has to go down to Philistia and serve one of the Philistine lords, as a mercenary. And then eventually Judah crowns him king. So he's king over Judah. Then we see after that, after Saul dies, Abner brings Israel to to David to be king of Israel. So he's now king of Israel. He's king of Judah, one nation now. Israel and Judah are one nation, the nation of Israel. And then we get into chapter 8, verse 1. It says, after this wonderful prayer, it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them, and David took Metheg Ammah. So Metheg Ammah, we're going to see, is the city of Gath. We'll look at that in a minute. And he took it out of the hands of the Philistines. And the reason we know that this is more of a title for the city, like Manchester is called the Queen City. So if you're in New Hampshire, you refer to the Queen City, you're talking about Manchester. If you talk about the Gate City, you're talking about Nashville, right? I guess what's Concord, the capital city, I guess. So you have like a more of a title than a name. Gath was actually the city. If you look at First Chronicles 18, we'll look at that remote context where you can kind of cross-reference two different books. Typically, Chronicles shows things from God's perspective, where Samuel and King show things from man's perspective. So here in 1 Samuel 18:1, now after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them and took Gath and her towns out of the hands of the Philistines. It's the same record. In fact, when you read after, it says, and he smote Moab, and the Moabites became David's servant and brought gifts. If you go back to 2 Samuel 8:2, it says, and he smote Moab and measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground, even with 2 lines measured he, to put to death one, and 1 full line to keep alive. And so the Moabites became David's servants and brought him gifts. So a little bit more information here in Samuel. David had certain people in the line that died, certain people in the line that lived. The ones that lived became David's servants. And we see this when somebody walks with God, and in Israel, when they walked with God, the nations round about them were subdued. They couldn't stand against Israel. We're going to see that in these next few chapters as well. Verse 3, and David smote also Hadaezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, and he went to recover his borders at the river Euphrates. This was the original border that God gave to Abram back in Genesis 15:18. Sometimes people say, you hear today, people say, well, that land doesn't belong to Israel. God gave it to Abraham first and then to Israel Abraham's seed. And, the earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof. If God gives it to somebody, it's his right to give it to whoever he wants to. And if you look at Genesis 15:18, or make a note of that, you'll see that God set that boundary to the river Euphrates when he gave it to Abraham. Verse 4, and David took from him 1,000 chariots. This is from this Hadadezer, the son of Rohab, king of Zobah, took from him 1,000 chariots and 700 horsemen and 20,000 footmen. And David brought all the chariot horses, but reserved for them 100 chariots. So, hey, you get to keep 100. We're taking the rest. You see that David, think about 1,000 chariots. That's quite an army. And David beat that army and then took 1,000 chariots from them, because you guys get to keep 100 to kind of keep the peace around here, but we're taking the rest of them. Verse 5. And when the Syrians of Damascus came to succor Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David slew of the Syrians 22,000 men. So 22,000 men, Syrian men, died when they came against David. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants of David and brought gifts. This was common. If you subdued a nation, they would serve you, and then part of that, they would give tribute or taxes, but they would have to bring, yearly, they'd have to bring gifts or taxes. Verse 6. Oh, no, we read that. Verse 7. And David took the shields of gold that were on the servant of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. So they had these beautiful gold decorated shields. David goes, yeah, we're going to take those too. Once you subdued a kingdom, you pretty much had, they called it the spoils of war, that he could collect this, he could take this with him. Verse 8, and from Betath, from Berothel, cities of Hadadezer, King David took exceeding much brass. Brass was a very important, metal. So they made a lot of things out of brass. And, it was definitely an important thing. So David took a bunch of brass from them. And then in verse 9, and when Tol, king of Hamath, heard that David had smitten all the hosts of Hadadezer, then Tol sent to Joram his son unto King David to salute him and bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and smitten him. For Hadadezer had wars with Tol, and Jordan brought with him vessels of silver, vessels of gold, vessels of brass. So this king thought, hey, rather than wait to get into a war with David, I'm just going to go bring him some gifts and say, hey, we're glad that you beat up this guy, because him and I were having fights anyway. Here's some gifts. We want to make peace with you. And so they did. They made peace that way. Verse 11, which also King David did dedicate unto the Lord with the silver and gold that he had dedicated of all nations which he subdued. So he brought this treasure into the treasury of the Lord. Now, there wasn't a temple yet. It was still just a tabernacle, a tent, but there were places that they would store, this treasure that belonged to God, that God, could use. And David collected that. And we'll see that out of a lot of the stuff that David collected, David was told that he was not allowed to build the temple because he was a man of war. And God said, no, you can't build it. You're a man of war. You shed blood. Your son, Solomon, he didn't tell him Solomon's time, but your son will ultimately build the house. David gets to collect all the things that will be needed for the temple, but he can't build it. He's not allowed to build it. Verse 12, of Syria and Moab, of the children of Ammon and of the Philistines and the Amalek, and of the spoil of Hadadezer, son of Rohab, king of Zoab. So he brought all the gold and silver out of all these places. And Syria is kind of up northwest of Israel, and Moab's down in the south, west of the Dead Sea. So he's literally spoiling the nations all around Israel, and nobody wants to mess with them because they just can't be beat on the battlefield. As long as they walk with God, they can't be beat on the battlefield. Verse 13, and David got him a name, and he returned from smiting of the Syrians in the Valley of Salt, being 18,000 men. So David's reputation was going before him. Now it's interesting here. It says, where David got him a name and he returned from smiting of the Syrians. Look back at 1 Chronicles 18, but we're going to look at verse 12. We'll see that it was actually one of his captains of the So it wasn't the captain of the host, but the brother of the Joab was the captain of David's host. He was the 5-star general. He was the top guy of David's army. He had a brother, we'll see, Abishai, who was like a lieutenant, or like it would have been one of the 1-star generals maybe, but he was up there. And he was the guy that in Chronicles, God kind of gives, the recognition to. From man's perspective, David won the battle. David's king, so king gets to take credit because he won the battle. He sent the troops. But here we see in First Chronicles 18:12, moreover, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, slew of the Edomites in the valley of Salt 18,000. And he put a garrison in Edom, and all the Edomites became David's servant. Thus the Lord preserved David wherever he went. So it's still David's victory, but the guy who was probably instrumental here is Joab's brother, Abishai. And this is the guy, Joab and Abishai slew Abner, the captain of Saul's host. I don't know if you remember that. David didn't want that to happen, but these guys, because Abner had killed their brother, they went and killed Abner, which, part of the culture was if somebody killed someone you loved, you had a right to go, you had the right to go back and, and to kill them, basically. All right, go back to 2 Samuel. So again, verse 14, same thing we read in Chronicles, we read here, and he put garrisons in Edom. This is south of Israel at the bottom. Below Israel is the Edom. Throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servant, and the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. Really, we're reading almost identical records between the two, but sometimes you want to do that because you'll get a piece of information in one of the records that maybe isn't in the other. So you read them to kind of let them overlap to get that full story. We do that in the Gospels, right? When we look at the others crucified with Christ, how many were crucified with Christ? Well, in one Gospel, it says 2 robbers, or it says 2 thieves. The real Greek word is robbers were crucified. And then in another place, it says 2 malefactors, which means evildoers. Now, every robber is an evildoer, but not every evildoer is a robber. You could be a murderer or a rapist, or you could be an insurrectionist. So when you look at those 2 records and you compare them, they can't be the same 2 people, because 2 of them they let out with Jesus, and then they did a bunch of things, and then they don't talk about the other 2. In the other gospel, they show Jesus being crucified. They show you doing those same bunch of things, and then 2 people crucified afterwards. Well, if they crucified him up here, they couldn't also crucify the same 2 guys. So we see that when we put the story together, there were 4 crucified with him. When we look at it individually, we may only see 2 here and 2 there, but they're crucified at different times. So to make them agree, we have to see that those are different people. So we look at Chronicles, we look at Samuel to kind of get that overlap. Verse 15 of 2 Samuel 8, and David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. That's something that we desire. We desire to have a just, righteous government. And it's so rare in mankind, because people, what's the great line? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you don't have somebody as king, if you don't have somebody that you report to, if you don't have your Lord and God that is going to hold you accountable, people abuse people. People take advantage of people. We see it in our own governments and governments around the world. Even our own government isn't always truthful with us. David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice. He was righteous. He was fair. We will eventually have a righteous king on the earth when Jesus Christ returns, and we'll get to serve him. And that's going to be a great day to have a really righteous kingdom. So verse 16, and Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the host. Joab was the captain of the host. That's the brother of Abishai we just read about, Joab. And Jehoshaphat, the son of Eliud, was the recorder, and Zadok, the son of Hittub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were the priests, and Sarai was the scribe. Now, Ahimelech, sometimes you can get confusing. He was named after his great-grandfather, which was very common in Israel, especially if somebody died. There was a law that said if a brother had a wife and had no children and the brother died, his brother was to go into his wife, his dead brother's wife, and raise up children to his brother's name. So it was common to name somebody after the dead. This Ahimelech, his grandfather, was the priest who gave David the sword of Goliath. Remember when he went in and said, "Hey, is there any weapons here? I had to leave in a hurry." Saul's chasing him, but Ahimelech doesn't know that. He thinks he's Saul's servant, so he goes, "I had to leave in a hurry. I don't have a sword. Is there a sword?" He goes, "Just the sword of Goliath." Well, that's kind of mine anyway. So yeah, why don't you give that to me? Well, then Doeg, the Edomite, tells on him, and Saul has him kill Ahimelech, the priest, kills like 80 priests. Well, one of the priests, Ahitub, escapes. He has a son, and he names him after his grandfather, the kid's grandfather, Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, where the priest, and Sarai was the scribe, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites. This is the archers and the slingers. These are names for the guys who shot arrows would be the archers, and the Pelethites would be the guys who did slings. A sling can be a very effective weapon where you can, well, it took Goliath down, and Goliath was like a beast. Goliath was a man of war. David, who was a young man, he didn't kill him with the sling. He knocked him out. Then he ran over, didn't have a sword, took Goliath's sword and cut Goliath's head off with his own sword. Well, he was unconscious. He couldn't do anything because David knocked him out with a sling. So the Cherethites, the archers, and the Pelethites, the slingers, were under this guy, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. And David's sons were chief rulers. So his sons had positions in the kingdom as well. Chapter 9, verse 1. And David said, "Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" You remember, David loved Jonathan. David and Jonathan were the best of friends. He loved each other. Jonathan gave David of his own wardrobe so that if he came to court, he wouldn't look out of place. He wouldn't feel out of place. He didn't come in wearing shepherd's clothes. He came in wearing Jonathan's clothes. Jonathan gave him a change of raiment that he used to wear. He gave to David to wear. So Jonathan and David were the best of friends. They loved each other. They fought together. And Jonathan made David swear. He goes, "Look, it's clear to me that God is going to make you the next king of Israel. Please don't cut off my house. Don't kill all the people." Because, if you think about it, it was common for a king. If there was a previous king and that king had sons that could lay claim on the throne, the new king would go and kill all the kids of the old king so that nobody could rise up and claim that, "Hey, I'm the real king of Israel." Jonathan asked David to swear to him, and David did. Look at 1 Samuel 20. Go back to 1 Samuel. So as we're reading this, we look back to see what did David actually say to Jonathan. David also swore the same to Saul. After he didn't kill Saul the second time, Saul said, "Hey, don't cut off my house completely when God makes you king." And David also made the same promise to Saul. But here he makes it to in 1 Samuel 20 in verse 14, we read, and so look at verse 13. "And the Lord do so much more to Jonathan, but if it please my father to do these evil, then I will show it to thee and send thee away, and thou mayest go in peace, and the Lord be with thee as he hath been with my father." So Jonathan's saying, "Look, you're telling me my father wants to kill you. I don't see it, but I'm going to go check. And if it's true, I'm going to send you away so that you don't get killed." Verse 14, "And thou shalt not only while yet I live show the kindness of the Lord, that I die not," that after God raises you up to be king, don't kill me, "but also thou shalt not cut off the kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord hath cut off the enemies of David, every one of them from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David. Let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies. So this is a second covenant that Jonathan and David made together. And David swore, "I will not cut off your house." If you have, sons or daughters that are, left behind after you go and I become king, I'm not going to cut off your house. He makes the same promise to Saul in First Samuel 24, but you can look at First Samuel 24, 20 through 22 if you want to look at him making the same promise to Saul, after Saul realized David's going to be king. So back in 2 Samuel 9:2, and there was of the house of Saul a servant whose name was Ziba, and when they had called him unto David the king, and said unto him, Art thou Ziba? And he said, Thy servant is he. And the king said, Is there not yet any of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God unto him? And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame in his feet. So when the king of Israel, Ishbosheth, was fleeing, one of the maids took Jonathan's son and dropped him, and he ended up crippling the kid. She ended up crippling the kid. So this is the kid we're talking about. He's there, but he's crippled. He's lame in his feet. Verse 4, and the king said unto him, Where is he? And Ziba said unto the king, Behold, he's in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lodebar. And King David sent and fetched him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodebar. And when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was come unto David, he fell on his face and did reverence. And David said to Mephibosheth, and he answered, Behold thy servant. And David said unto him, Fear not, for I will surely show the kindness for Jonathan thy father's sake, and will restore thee all the lands of Saul thy father, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually. This is quite a generous thing for David to do. I'm going to give you the lands that belong to Saul, and you're going to eat at my table. You're going to be one of my court, basically. You're going to be someone who, eats with the king every day, basically. Verse 8, and he bowed himself and said, What is thy servant that thou should look upon such a dead dog as I am? Very humble, right? Being humble. I don't deserve this. But David wanted to do this for Jonathan's sake. Then the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said unto him, I have given unto thy master's son all that pertaineth to Saul and to all his house. Thou therefore and thy sons and thy servants shall till the land for him, and thou shalt bring in the fruits that thy master's son may have food to eat. And Mephibosheth, thy master's son, shall eat bread always at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And then said Ziba unto the king, According to all that my lord the king hath commanded his servant, so shall thy servant do. And Mephibosheth said, the king, he shall eat at my table as one of the king's sons. So I'm going to treat him very well. David was genuine. David wasn't doing this. David did this because he loved Jonathan. Jonathan was good to David. David loved Jonathan. Jonathan loved David. Jonathan died with Saul. Now he's trying to take care of his son. Chapter 10. We'll probably wrap up here in chapter 10. And it came to pass after this that the king of the children of Ammon died, and Hanun his son reigned in his stead. Then said David, I will show kindness unto Hanun the son of Nahash, as his father showed kindness unto me. And David sent to comfort him by the hand of his servants for his father. And David's servants came into the land of the children of Ammon. So at this point, there's peace in the land. David has pretty much kicked everybody's ass. So nobody's fighting with Israel at this point. So David sends ambassadors to Ammon because he hears the king has died, and he wants to, what do you do when somebody dies? You either send, or if you're a king, you send a representative to say, hey, we wanted to say sorry to hear about your dad. Verse 3, and the princes of the children of Ammon said unto Hanun their lord, thinkest thou that David doth honor thy father when he hath sent comforters unto thee? Hath not David rather sent his servants unto thee to search the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it? So they're putting this evil thought in the king of Ammon's head, that David's not doing this to be a nice guy, that David is doing this because he wants to see how strong your city is and if he can take it. Wherefore Hanun, verse 4, took David's servant and shaved off one half of their beards and cut off their garments in the middle, even to their buttocks, and sent them away. This is a great dishonor he's doing to David. In the East, it was considered an insult to show a man who had a great beard a pair of scissors. It was an insult just to show him that. Here, to cut off half their beard is like a great dishonor. It's not something. This is David's ambassadors. If you do that to the ambassador of a country, you do that to the country. You've literally said, I think nothing of you or your country. I'm I'm willing to dishonor your ambassadors that you sent to me because I think you did it, for bad reasons. So I'm going to embarrass them and send them back to you. Whoa, not a good thing. Verse 5. And when they told it unto David, he sent to meet them because the men were greatly ashamed. And the king told them, tarry at Jericho until your beards be grown and then return. So David takes care of them. Don't come home until your beards grow back in. Just stay put. I'm going to take care of this, but you stay put. I don't want you coming in and being embarrassed because of what this idiot did to you. So, verse 6. And when the children of Ammon saw that they stank before David, what a great way to write it. You smell to me, you stink. That you've made me, when I think of you, it makes me ill that you guys smell so bad to me right now. When the children of Ammon saw that they stank before David, the children of Ammon sent and hired the Syrians of Beth Rehob and the Syrians of Zobah and 20,000 footmen, and the king of Marach 1,000 men, and of Ishtab 12,000 men. And when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the host of the mighty men. So David's going to take his best guys out to fight this battle. And Joab, being the captain of the host, is going to lead them. This will come up later. Joab and also David's mighty men. We're going to read about David's mighty men, who they were, and how God pointed them out. And there really weren't a lot of men that get, his valiant men, his mighty men. A valiant man, it's the masculine of a virtuous woman. For the virtuous woman, that virtuous is the feminine and valiant is the masculine. It means somebody of great character, somebody who is really just an outstanding person. David had a couple dozen, maybe 3 dozen mighty men. We'll read about that. We're going to have to read Chronicles to get the list of them. And then we're going to read the record of, well, we'll see when we get there, the next chapter. But so verse 7 again, when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the host of the mighty men. And the children of Ammon came out and put the battle in array and entered in of the gate, and the Syrians of Zobah and Rohab and Ishtab and Machab were by themselves in the field. And when Joab saw the front of the battle were against him and behind him, he chose all the choice men of Israel and put them in array against the Syrians. And the rest of the people he delivered in the hand of Abishai. That's his brother. We talked about him. This is the guy. He was like under Joab. Joab was the 5-star general. He was like the 3-star general. He was leading a great group of men, and he was Joab's brother. So they trusted each other greatly. And he put them in array against the children of Aram. And so Joab says to Abishai, he said, if the Syrians be too strong for me, then thou shalt help me. But if the children of Ammon be too strong for thee, then I will come and help thee. Be of good courage and let us play the men for our people. This is a great challenge. He's challenging Abishai. You need and I need to be courageous and bold so that our men see us out front leading and they are courageous and bold. Leadership doesn't sit in the back and send people out. Real leadership leads. These men were leading Israel. They were right in the thick of it, and they, had great courage. They weren't afraid in any way, shape, or form. And when you have genuine leadership, it encourages the people that follow them. It makes them want to do great things. And Joab and Abishai are showing that they are great leaders here. And Joab says to Abishai, be of good courage and let us play the men for our people. You be manly, stand up, show them what you're made of so that they will then follow you with the same kind of passion. For the cities of our God, we're going to do this for the cities of our God. And the Lord do that which he seemeth him good. God does what God's going to do. And God always supported Israel when they weren't walking in idolatry. So they're going out for the true God. Verse 13. And Joab drew nigh, and the people that were with him unto the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. They couldn't stand. And when the children of Ammon saw that the Syrians were fled, they fled also before Abishai. and entered into the city. So Joab returned from the children of Ammon and came to Jerusalem. And when the Syrians saw that they were smitten before Israel, they gathered themselves together. And Hadarezer sent and brought out the Syrians that were beyond the river, and they came to Helm and Sobach, and the captains of the host of Hazor went before them. And when it was told David that he gathered all Israel together and passed over Jordan and came to Helm, and there the Syrians set themselves in array and against David and fought with him. And the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew of the men of 700 chariots of the Syrians and 40,000 horsemen, and smote Shebaoth, the captain of their host, who died there. So the guy who was Joab's counterpart on the other side, he dies when he fights David. David kills him and 700 chariots. I mean, chariots were like tanks. They were very hard to stand against. David's men did such. Verse 19, and when all the kings that were servants to Hadad saw that they were smitten before Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them. So the Syrians feared to help the children of Ammon anymore. So we see that when these men stood for God, they could not be beaten in battle. And anytime Israel loses a battle, you can always trace it back to idolatry. When they came into the promised land, they didn't lose a battle until one of the guys took an idol and buried it in his tent. And they went out against the city of Ai and they got their butt kicked. And Joshua was like, oh my God, what happened? And they brought the priest in, and the priest said, well, narrow it down. Okay, it's this house of Israel. Okay, then it's this group. Okay, it's this subgroup. Okay, it's this guy's house. And he said, what did you do? He goes, I took an idol. Okay, and they stoned the guy to death. He died for that. And then they went back and fought Ai, and they won because they put idolatry away. Anytime Israel fought a battle, they did not lose unless they got involved in idolatry beforehand. All right. I'm going to stop here tonight because I don't want to go into the next chapter. The next chapter, we talk about David and Uriah. This is one of David's faithful men, one of David's valiant men, one of the 36 people that God calls out by name. And his wife was Bathsheba. And David takes Bathsheba. And there's some great lessons we're going to learn as we look at this record. One of the things that I've learned from this record is God does not judge us by our single worst day. I want you to think about this, because you may meet somebody who's done something horrendous, something horrible. In fact, I can't remember who I was talking to, but they were ministering to somebody. Oh, I remember. It was in a fellowship on Sunday. They were ministering to somebody, and this guy couldn't forgive himself. And when you talk about what he did, you or I might think, okay, yeah, that's kind of bad, but that's not like, it's not like horrendous. It's not like what David did to Uriah, but the guy couldn't forgive himself. If you ever minister to somebody like that, you need to talk to him about David. David did two horrible things, really 3 horrible things. He took Bathsheba in adultery. Now people say, well, he's the king. Every woman belongs to the king. That's nonsense. David was under the same law that the rest of Israel was under. He was not allowed to take another man's wife. That's idolatry. That's adultery. And Nathan, the prophet, will call David out on it. We're going to read some of these records, and we're going to read the Psalm 51 that David wrote after Nathan called him out. But he wanted to cover it up because she got pregnant. So he sent for Uriah, who was one of his valiant men, and he got him drunk, hoping he would go home and lay with his wife so that he could think, oh, it's my kid. Uriah wouldn't go to his house. He goes, my lord Joab and all the army is sleeping in the field. I'm going to go to my house. I won't do it. He wouldn't do it. He slept at the gate of the palace. He wouldn't go to his house. So David sent him with his own death warrant and sent him to Joab and says, put Uriah in the hottest battle and retire from him. Leave him there so that he dies. And he died. Two horrible things. The third horrible thing he did is he tried to cover it up. But you can't hide stuff like that from God. We're going to read this record. Now, were these horrible things to do? They were. But at the end of David's life, God doesn't judge him on his single worst day. God calls David a man after his own heart. Not because of what he did, but in spite of what he did. And we're going to look at those records next week. We're going to look at the record here. We're going to look at some records in Chronicles. We're going to look at Psalm. We're going to see how God worked with David. The difference between David and Saul, when the prophet confronted Saul, Saul denied all accountability. Well, I didn't do it. The people did it. Well, yeah, we did it, but we did it because we wanted to sacrifice unto God. It really wasn't that big a deal. And then he lies. Yep, we did the word of the Lord. Really? Then when am I hearing these sheep bleating? Oh yeah, well, the people wanted to keep those to sacrifice. And we only did it to sacrifice to God. Everything else we destroyed. He would never come clean. And Samuel refused to pray with him, pulled away, and said, no, God has when he went to go away, Saul grabbed the hold of Samuel's robe and it tore. And he said, God has rent the kingdom from your hand. God wanted to establish you, but you've chosen not to obey the Lord. So God has taken the kingdom from you and given it to your neighbor who's more worthy. Talking about David. Now, at this point, Saul didn't know who that was. Eventually, it became clear. But David repents. Now, there are consequences to sin. The first child that David got Bathsheba pregnant on, dies. That child dies as a consequence of that sin. And you think, oh, that's horrendous. The next child they have is Solomon, who God loved. So did God forgive David and Bathsheba? Yes. Yeah. And at the end of David's life, God calls David a man after his own heart. So if you ever suffer where you're thinking, oh, I don't think God can forgive me of this. I mean, God forgave Paul, and Paul was killing Christians. God forgave David, who murdered one of his own, who not only murdered, David conspired to have him murdered by unbelievers. That's pretty sad. And this was one of his faithful men, Uriah. So we'll look at that next week. We'll spend some time. I don't want to start halfway through and then jump in again. I want to look at that as a complete kind of overall picture. But in what we covered tonight, are there any questions or comments or thoughts? Okay. Are you guys enjoying Samuel? I know, I just think there's such, it's almost like the color commentary when you see people living God's word in difficult times. You know, it's like, wow, man, it's inspiring to see people stand for God through difficult times and to see great, victories. And God works with his people, and God did some wonderful things with David. David, we're still talking about him today. I mean, David's throne, ultimately Christ will sit on David's throne. God promised David that of his kingdom there would be no end. That's a promise of the coming of Christ, that Christ would sit on David's throne, and of his kingdom there would be no end. So, well, let me stop this recording and then